This is one of those times that I'm finding myself almost speechless. It's hard to imagine as a pastor not having the words, but this is just one of those stories where I am awestruck by the wonder and the work and the goodness of God and how God is moving in the midst of this story. I could tell you that this story starts with just a single small group, but for me, it actually goes further back. And I think all the way back to 2020 in the middle of COVID when Kristen Suddeth took me and Jesse under her wing. I was pregnant at the time and struggling and stressed, and both of our families live in Alabama. And she said, "This is an opportunity to welcome some people into our family." And so the beginnings of this family started to be formed, and I got to know her daughter, Addie. And as I got to know Addie and knew that she was in a relationship where they were looking at engagement, I thought back to something that Jesse and I felt like we didn't have when we first got married, and that was community. I knew that this was a moment that God was pointing us to starting something new. And I thought about the importance of community and how when we find our people, we become a family. And I wanted to give that to these young couples who were about to go through a big change in their lives, through this time where they would need friends to rely on. And so we launched this group and we started by creating a covenant together. And I can think all the way back to that first group where it was a little awkward and we were really unsure what we were doing, but we knew that we wanted to commit to one another and that we were willing to give the time and the effort. And I look back at that covenant that we set, and I remember distinctly that Addie said one word that she was looking for, and that word was friendship. And I never knew that it would be in two more iterations of that small group that Kendra would walk in the door and a friendship would be formed that would be beyond words.
So we lived in Dunwoody first before we bought our house, and when we after buying the house and when we were moving in, we didn't have friends down here. We had family who could come down and help, but we told them no, it's okay. We moved ourselves, just two of us, all of our things into our house, and it was just us. And we just knew we went. We finally had a house. We finally had the place, roots. We went to church, and we both had come from Methodist churches, and so I had reached out to Catherine about small group, and or I didn't even know about small group. She just told me it was this thing, and I remember showing up that night. Um, we both had shown up, Michael and I, and we were a little bit nervous, but also eager, and we walked away like, wow, there's other people in the world that are like our age, figuring out life, have either bought a house or looking for a house. And like, we've all got these similar struggles. And we also, have these things in common. And like, being our age, sometimes it's hard to find people who like care about church or even believe in God. And it was like refreshing to have that. And I'll never forget, Addie was sitting across the table from me, and she asked where we lived. And I told her the address, and she said, "Hold on a second. That's where my mom grew up. You're in the house where my mom grew up."
The day that Kendra and Michael came into the small group, we were sitting at a table and we started talking, and we figured out that they actually lived in the house that my grandparents raised my aunt and my mom in, which was in the neighborhood, walking distance from a house that James and I were about to move into at the time. So we realized we were about to be really fast friends.
Back in the mid 70s, when I was 2 and Karen was a baby, my family moved into this house almost by accident, just a little. There was some confusion with the amount that my parents had paid in the down payment or what would now be in an escrow, but that didn't happen then. So they delivered a check to the people that owned the house for the down payment. And when everybody got to the closing table, the wife had told her husband that only half of the money had come in, and they tried to back out of that deal, but because they only had half of the down payment, they were forced to sell the house. And so we moved in here and lived here until I was in 8th grade. It's kind of exciting to be back in this house and see how a new family is growing here, and how their family has decorated differently. This used to be a playroom full of Barbie dream houses and all kinds of dolls and an old Apple computer back in the 80s. And so for us, this is home. The church is also that for us. Having grown up there, we were both baptized there. We, Karen and I both got married there. Our daughters have grown up there.
The church was always there. It was a mainstay in our home. It wasn't something that we took lightly. It was always, it was a big part. Our parents always said, church comes first, family comes second, and everything else comes after that. The church to me is just a part of who we are.
Last year, when my mom got diagnosed with cancer, Kendra always answered the phone. Her and Michael would walk past our house and stop and come check on us. They prayed with us. They were just always there. And when we found out that she had come through and she had beat cancer and she was going to make a full recovery, they celebrated with us and were just our rocks through it all. So then when we found out that Dawson was ready to find a kidney, we were going to be there for them every step of the way.
So my younger brother Dawson, there's 6 years between us, and he still lives in Louisville. He got sick when he was in middle school with a disease known as Wagner's. It's a little bit like lupus. My mom was really concerned because doctors were trying to treat him. Nothing was really working at the time. They give him, treat him for the flu, things that were normal. And finally, a doctor said, if this was my child, I would take them to Kosair Children's Hospital, which is a lot like CHOA here in Atlanta. And shortly after he got there, we found out what he had, and also found out that he probably wouldn't have made it another month. He would have passed away. From that point on, Dawson went into recovery and remission of his disease, and it was a fight. We did a Make-A-Wish trip as a family, and life was better. He was alive, but it was difficult, and we also knew that the disease had attacked his kidneys, and that one day when he got older, he would likely need a new kidney, a donor, or something. That was on the back burner. We just lived our lives. He healed, he got better. And it was about the time when we had moved here that it was like a month after Michael and I moved to Atlanta that he found out his kidneys were in bad shape. And so he had to go on dialysis, which is a good thing because it can save someone's life and it works. But for him, it was scary. It was a change. I think he was maybe 21, 22 at the time. Not something that a young adult thinks that they're going to have to go through. Shortly after working through that, he got very, very sick. And we found out that his Wagner's had flared up a bit. Things were not working with dialysis for him with that treatment. And he had a tear in his esophagus and ended up septic in the hospital. And so this was in 2020 when we couldn't see him, we couldn't be in the room with him. I remember getting the call that my brother was sick and that he might not make it. And nothing was clear. And Michael and I were alone. We didn't really have friends here. And I just remember having to leave Michael, hop in the car, and drive as fast as I could to Louisville. And for like 6 hours, I knew he was in surgery. Hopefully a surgery that would save his life. And I didn't listen to any music. I didn't talk to anyone. I prayed. That's all I did. And I remember before getting in the car, I asked my mom to hold the phone to him so I could tell him I loved him. I just remember standing in that parking lot praying, and I heard the clear as day, he's healed. He's gonna be okay. And I knew in my heart it was gonna work out. And it was like God was telling me it's fine. He's healed, you know. We're gonna get through this. And he did. And it has been a long road. He was on a ventilator for a while. Had lots of different tubes. He has many moments in the hospital that were frightening, some where he was by himself. That he just, for him personally, I know he had always believed in God, but I know he believes even stronger because of those moments, and because the only thing he had that he could do when he was alone is pray. I remember a moment with my mom's best friend and her saying, I know this is hard on you. And it was when I had went up there to visit him and he was ill. And she said, but I really believe that there's a reason you're in Atlanta. There's a reason that you're down there. And I don't know what it is, but it's something.
Kendra shared with Addie, and Karen and I got a text, which is not that unusual because we constantly, the three of us are texting, Addie, Karen, and I, and we got a text that said, hey, Kendra's brother is sick and he needs a kidney. I knew right away that I am not an option for that because of the cancer. And so that immediately eliminated me from that. A couple weeks later, Karen mentioned that she had filled out the paperwork and had talked to them. And we thought that was just really, it was interesting. It was great, but we really didn't necessarily think it would go that far.
I remember sending his website page to our family group chat, and Karen immediately responded that she would get tested. And we didn't realize at the time how much that process would be, but it just kept moving forward. It started with a blood test and then lots and lots of other testing every step of the way. They kept coming back and saying, okay, we need one more test. Okay, we need one more test. And so we took that as a really good sign. And I personally, I don't know why, but I just knew it was going to work. I just knew that God would not bring us this far, and this took months, and I knew it wasn't going to be a no.
There was a day at church where I just remember, because Addie's been the positive cheerleader, and she's the one that's saying, I know it's going to happen. I know it's going to happen. And it had been, things in life and just finding out some bad news. And I was at church and I thought, I want to believe, because when it happens, I want to be able to say, I knew it was going to happen and I believed it. And so I had that moment with myself and went up to communion and prayed with Michael. And when I sat back down in my seat, of course, I was emotional feeling. And I saw Karen go by and I was like, oh, I don't know if I can talk to her. I'm just feeling, emotional. And she came over and knelt down and she said, Kendra, I believe it's going to happen.
All of this testing is happening. All of this is coming together. And then that call comes.
And my supervisor was in the classroom and my phone rang and it said Emery. And so I was like, oh, I've got to answer this call. And she's like, no, go right ahead. So I answered it. And on August 1st, they were like, well, you're a match.
When we did find out finally that it was legitimate and that she is a full match, it's just amazing. I feel so happy in so many ways and so grateful. Not just grateful that my brother will get a kidney, but grateful because I've met some really amazing people and I have an amazing community and family.
I think that we've always known since we became friends that our friendship was really special and that they would always be a part of our lives. But now our families are just tied forever. I don't think that you can explain it other than God. I really don't. I don't believe in coincidence. I believe that God works always, and he's always working, and everything is very strategic, and there's always a plan. I mean, this goes back before we even knew the Harifs, before we even knew that he was sick. We didn't even know him. And so to think that, just a couple from Kentucky randomly moves to Atlanta, Georgia, ends up in a house that's somehow connected to my family. We meet in a small group at a church that they could have picked any church to go to. And they ended up at our church at the right time. They'd lived here for years before they went to this church and asked, was there a place for them in a small group? And we had started this small group. I mean, I don't think that you can explain all of those things away other than God did it.
I mean, I think that you can't really look at all of the twists and turns of how far back he placed people in places to get us to where we are today. I mean, if the sale of this house for my parents had fallen through and we never would have lived here, it never would have been, this house wouldn't have been a part of this story. Would we still have been brought together through friendship? I mean, very likely. I mean, who knows? But I do believe that God puts people where they're supposed to be at the time that he wants them to be there. And I do think that he sees everything, and part of his plan is to bring people where he needs them to accomplish what he wants to accomplish.
One day I went to get my hair done by Addie, and we were sitting there, and I said, hey, I just want to catch up and see how the group's going, see how Kendra and Dawson are. And she started to walk out everything for me and said that it was finally at the point where Karen could get tested. And I remember Addie saying, this is just one of those moments where I truly feel like God is so in the midst of this, in the middle of this, holding this, that I would be shocked if it didn't work out. And so that's what I'm holding on to. When I got out of my chair that day, I felt hope for Kendra and for Dawson and for Karen to be a match, because Addie was right. This was one of those times where it felt like God was going to do it. We were just right there. We could feel the Spirit moving. It was one of those times where it felt like there was a tie of love just threading through our lives, and that everyone was interconnected in a way that we could never understand, never comprehend. And then Reverend Porter preached about strategically placed and divinely appointed. And I thought all the way back, and the details started to come together. 2 years to almost the exact date, 3 people who needed a group, and a family built on a house of love. The heart of discipleship is friendship. Sometimes all it takes is just a small step to making some friends, to find your people. But really, in all of that, the house that we built is shaped from the love of God. And so, in looking to find the words, all I can say is thanks be to God and amen.